Thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you very much for coming. It's great to be here and to share this work with you, which is done in collaboration with Jonah Berger at Wharton. In this paper, we look at when and why high-status individuals use seemingly downscale taste. The subtitle of this paper is actually, "When they go high, we go low." So we know that consumers spend money to buy products that help them signal who they are, and specifically to signal status. The most prominent theory about the diffusion of taste and fashion is called Trickle-Round. As the name suggests, this theory proposes that fashion and taste start with the elite, and then they trickle down through society, driven by imitation from subordinate tiers. So the idea is that if the highs decide to be blue, and then with time the behavior is imitated by others, then this behavior loses its signaling identity, and therefore the high status people will move on to a different behavior, like say they decide to be yellow. And the idea is that by changing and abandoning a previous taste, they reestablish distinction from the subordinate tiers. Two recent papers in marketing have actually analyzed this precise dynamic, and so they show it. So let me tell you briefly what they demonstrate. Is that, for example, when some high-status brands become used, they become more mainstream and they become used by lots of other people, then the high-status people either abandon these brands, so say they were using Burberry, now they move on to Ferragamo or Chanel, another brand, or they keep consuming the same brand, that's very interesting, but they pass on to more sophisticated type of goods that are less conspicuous. So the bottom line is that when faced with imitation, the high status people move on to higher end and more sophisticated type of luxuries. And while this type of framework captures a lot of like the new status signals adopted by the highs, let me tell you about some examples that we see in the marketplace that are a bit more difficult to reconcile within this framework. So I'll tell you about some high-status actors and also some high-status brands. So this is a famous Italian chef, like he's won, Michelin stars, his restaurants have, and he brags about using potato chips in his recipes. She may look a bit more familiar to you. It's Jessica Parker. She's like shopping in a very dusty and not nice flea market in Rome. When I saw it, I couldn't believe it. And then this is a perfume that's been launched by Moschino. You can get it at Sephora for $90. This is a $2,000 version of the 99-cent IKEA bag. And this is like, maybe you've seen it. It made the news. Nordstrom was selling out of duct tape shoes in the fall. These are like from $500 and above. In all of these examples, you see that it's not really as if like the highs are moving on to more sophisticated type of goods, but rather it's as if they're getting inspired by downscale tastes, things that we typically see as lowbrow, and they're co-opting them. Which we think raises an interesting question, at least for us, of like when and why would the high status actors do this? And to try to explain this phenomenon, we adopt a signaling perspective, and we propose that these specific type of signals are actually trickling round, meaning that they bypass the middle class and they pass directly from the low status, lowbrow taste to the high. So let's see how, from a more theoretical standpoint, it's plausible that this type of behavior operates as a signal of status. A signal is defined as an observable characteristic attached to an individual that can be changed. So the idea is that anything you decide to wear is a signal as long as others can see it. And in addition to being observable, for a signal to operate as a signal of status in the eyes of others, it also has to be costly. So these are the two elements that signaling theory identifies as the key, so that a behavior operates as a signal of status. If you think about traditional luxury, they fit the framework very well, as you can see them, and the cost in this term is monetary, right? So you have to pay a lot of money to buy this stuff. So how can, using things that are associated with low status, how can they be costly? We propose that the cost in this case has to do with misidentification. The idea is that if you're using something that's seen clearly as like low status or low brow, you're running the risk of being misunderstood as a low brow shop or, as a low status brand. So the idea is that while the high status people feel confident enough in their social standing to deviate from the norm, the middle status people don't. There is a big literature that talks about middle status anxiety, middle status conformity, suggesting that the middle status people avoid anything that has to do with the ones above them, right? So basically this is the key thing, and why theoretically these type of signals can operate as a signal of higher status. And this is at a more conceptual level what we try to do in this paper, on which we've been working for quite a while. So status is defined as a higher position compared to others on a value dimension, which could be monetary, right, economic capital or income, but also knowledge. So we're also looking at higher education, knowledge in certain domains, that could be fashion, could be wine. And throughout the studies, we either look at examples of, say, high-end restaurants versus lower-end restaurants, people who are wealthier than others, and as I just said, people who know more than others in a specific domain. And then we also, to study this phenomenon in a bit more controlled fashion, come up with a paradigm in which we assign people to different status positions in the lab. So we have measured status and we assign people to status positions. And then on the dependent variable side, meaning the things that we measure, the outcome, we're looking at choice or preference for things that are seen as downscale. So this could be lowbrow food, things, fashion items that people see as downscale, products that by design mix and match high and low taste, things that respondents tell us that they see them as low status, or things that we as experimenter arbitrarily position as associated with the lower status groups. And then we propose that the high status people exhibit a higher propensity to pick this type of products to distinguish themselves. And then I'm not going to get into the details of this, but we also look at moderators of the effect, that is, what makes this effect stronger or weaker. And specifically, what we say is that when the high status people pick a specific taste, they mix and match it with higher high status things, so that then that's also a specific signaling strategy that allows them to be different from the lows. So if you look at the chef, sure, he's using potato chips, but he's also mixing it with a lot of delicacies. So in a sense, that allows him to disentangle himself from the very, very low, right? So that's the idea. This is the empirical evidence that we've gathered in the paper. We've been working on this for quite a while. I'll pick and choose some of these. If you're actually curious about this, I'll be happy to tell you more about it. We have a paper, so I'll be happy to share it. So I thought we'd start with this one, this set of studies in which we're looking at fashion knowledge as a proxy for status. So we're going to look at fashion-savvy people. This study was inspired by a game I used to play when I was a kid in Italy. It's called Spin the Wheel of Fashion. And so the idea is that the task that participants have to engage in the study is actually dressing up a model. This is like when I was a happy kid before academia. And then, so the idea is that we wanted to find products, right, that are seen as either high status or low status, and then participants have to create outfits. So to find the stimuli, first we run a preset with a different set of respondents, and we identify product pairs that vary on status, so that we pick within each set of products the ones that seem the highest status, the most upscale, and the most downscale. The most upscale, the most downscale. Similarly here, this is the highest, this is the lowest. And then for one product category, we pick two products that are seen as neutral, so equivalent on status. This is to find the stimuli for the study. Then in the main study, we actually wanted to recruit some people who are very fashion savvy and some that aren't. So we actually run it here at Columbia. I've run this study 2 times, and we've always recruited the people who belong to the retail and luxury club, and then We compare this with control groups. That's either people always here at Columbia in the lab or people that we try to hold constant, hold the same demographic factors so that we can match the samples. These people think they know more about fashion and they actually do know more. So this is an objective scale that we give them. So this is a task in the game. So the idea is that we tell each participant that imagine you're going to an event and you can pick your alter ego. So you choose one of these figurines, and then the idea is that although you're just wearing this white simple dress, you want to choose the accessories that you want to use, and so we're trying to put them in a signaling mind state. And then the dependent variable is which products will they pick. So they choose one product one at a time, so they see all of the pairs one at a time. Again, we are interested in seeing if the people who are more fashion savvy are more likely to pick the products that are seen as more downscale. And then we don't expect to see a difference for the neutral type of pair. Okay? So this is what we find. So there is a significant interaction between the product category and how much these people know about fashion, such that for the 3 product pairs in which there's clearly one downscale product, you see that there is this curvilinear trend such that the people who know more, this is what this axis is, are more prone to picking those. Whereas for the neutral product pair, we do not see this difference. Then in a follow-up study, we look at the same study, but we try to make people in a high distinction mode. We replicate these findings. And then in another study that's always done with fashion-savvy people here at Columbia, we try to improve the stimuli. And for example, we use these. I'll show you the other ones. Because you may say maybe in the other study, the products didn't look very similar, right? So maybe it was driven by the aesthetic looks. So we try to hold that constant. So in this case, the product sets, they all look similar. Second, you may say maybe those downscale products are not really downscale. So we make sure that we have really downscale things here. It's like the 99 cents IKEA bag or polyester bags. The high-end goods, maybe you may say, they were very conspicuously branded. We know that the high-status people the fashion-savvy people don't like them. So now so we try basically to improve the design, and we test a few other products, including this one. and we find that the fashion-savvy people are more likely to pick the products that by design mix and match high and low status. Also see that here, we're interested in marketing, so we're interested in seeing the consequences for products that actually mix by design high and low taste. Then in another set of products, here I'll just describe this briefly, instead of giving people examples of low status products, we ask them to write about different type of products that they see themselves as downscale. So in this case, we're not imposing. It's really what they see as downscale. And then after a feeling task, we ask them, whether they like this type of products. And then we measure, in this case, status as social status. And so what we find is, again, these trends such that the people who are higher in status like this type of products a bit more. And then this is, how am I doing on time? We're good? This is actually my favorite set of studies in which we really try to get at these constructs in a more abstract way and recreate these dynamics in the lab. So I'll try to make justice to the design, but just so you know, we have run many versions of this. So the idea is that we try to set up a game in the lab in which we have observers and players. The observers play before, and the idea, all you need to know is that the way in which we are going to pay the players is based on what the observers tell us. And then the players, in this case, in this one specifically, there were people here in the lab. They come to the lab and they're told that they will play a game, and in which the objective is to signal status, and that depending on the outcome of the game, they can win even $2 above their pay, what they're being paid for being in the lab. And then we create this society in which we tell people, imagine you're living in this society, there are 3 types of people. The high people tend to wear this watch, the middle people tend to wear this watch, the low this one, and there is also a combination of shape and color that have no association. Then in the basic scenario, we tell everyone, you imagine you have been assigned to be in a high. So this is your watch, and now you're going to play the game. Remember that the objective is to signal to others that you're a high-end person. The very first round, we just want to make sure that people understood the game. So we tell them, these are all the possible combinations you can pick. Which one do you want to pick? This is very basic. We're always reminding that you want to be perceived as high. It's almost like a manipulation check. So we ask them, what do you pick? If they pick this one, which is what they've been assigned to, they learn that they receive $1 immediately. So we're even reinforcing the behavior. You have been assigned to be in a high. You're earning $1 more for choosing to stick to that. And then the action arrives actually in the second round, in which we introduce imitation. This is a shock. So the idea is that now things are getting a bit more complicated, because the idea is that the middle are imitating you. So they're either adopting the color or the shape or both things of your own signals. And what do you do? And just so you know, we have tried this also with imitation stemming from the laws. We have tried. We have shuffled, the colors and the shapes and random assignment to different status positions. Just so you know, I'm just presenting you the basic. And then the idea is, all right, so now what do you do? Remember that you always have to signal a high, but what would you pick? And then before they learn whether they want another dollar or not, we also tell them to tell us why did you pick whatever you choose, and whether any of these motives is describing why you decided to do whatever you decided to do. We're particularly interested in seeing if anyone is moving to one of these two combinations, which notice are the mix of low and high, right? So this would be consistent with our theory, if anyone goes here. And so what we find is that, of course, the vast majority of people in the very first round sticks to the yellow triangle or to whatever, they were assigned to begin with. And then, interestingly, still the majority of people sticks to who they were, but there is a significant decrease. So then the interesting question is, all right, what do they do? And so what we find is that the only combination that increases above chance, actually, in the second round is the yellow pentagon, which, if you remember, was one of the two that was mixing and matching high and low taste. So we find that this is very consistent with our explanation. Again, we wouldn't expect this to be much higher than that, because we're also investigating like niche behaviors. These are alternative type of signals, right? So and we found this, as I told you, many times. And then when you look at the motives, why is it that these people are choosing to do that? Interestingly, these are the blue bars are the people who picked the mix and match option. And if you look, they really want to differentiate themselves from the middles. And then this is higher than the people who said other things. And also this helps us to look at other type of motives, right? Authenticity, simply just wanting to stand out. And then just before closing, I want to show you, this is a very neat study that we did by scraping some information online from restaurants. So in this case, we downloaded, I don't know if you guys know this website, it's called Menu Pages. It's a collection of menus from restaurants in big cities, so we focused on New York. And we downloaded the menus of more than 1,000 restaurants. And then we wanted to see, whether high-status restaurants are more likely than middle-status restaurants to offer lowbrow recipes, and if yes, whether they pair the lowbrow item together with the delicacy, so similar to what I mentioned before, the example of the chef. And so I'm not going to get into the detail, but the idea is that we first identify a series of items that are seen by independent raters as lowbrow. So we identify about 50 of these type of recipes. Then we look at the distribution of these items throughout restaurants. And then what we want to see is conditional on offering these lowbrow items. Are high-end restaurants pairing them with things that are fundamentally different than other restaurants? Right, so this idea of mixing and matching the high and low. And so we do co-occurrence of words analysis in the way in which these items are presented on menus. And what we find is that at high-end restaurants, when offering these things, the high-end restaurants tend to pair them with like lobster, truffle, or other delicacies, whereas other restaurants tend to offer them more like with chicken, cheese. And then importantly, you may say, well, maybe it's because these restaurants are more likely to offer these things to begin with. Or we also compare it with the base rate of occurrence of those items among them, and we find that in fact it's 5.5. So it's even higher than the base rate for offering this type of things. So we think that this is evidence, it's in the field, so of course there are always, 1,000 alternative explanations, but of this idea that when offering low status things, people mix and match them with other high status signals to disentangle themselves. And so just to conclude, this is the conceptual framework, is what I showed you before. In terms of implications of this research, first of all, we think that it helps us explain from a theoretical standpoint these consumer trends like the bourgeoisie or the normcore, or again, why Nordstrom is selling, fact they choose. And so it helps us reconcile that. And from more like a practical implication, we think that incorporating select downscale styles into the collection of these house status brands actually helps them be more, up to date. And it's like we see that this type of behaviors is gaining a lot of momentum. So in a sense, we think that we're basically explaining why this is happening. And I must say that since I've started to work on this project, it's been much, much easier to find examples. So I see it more and more, so it's gaining definitely momentum. So this is all from me. I'll leave you with a message. And I don't know, do we do the Q&A now or after? Okay, sounds good. Anyone thoughts? Yes. Okay.
So there might be different products, competing products, which are like mix and match. For example, there were two watches, which were both mixed in terms of their characteristics.
Yeah.
But is there anything to show why consumers would prefer one over the other?
Yeah. It's a very good question. It's because this may have to do a little bit with the paradigm of the game. And so people did not want to move. Everybody picked things that are in the top row. I think it's because we have a mental association that whatever is on top is higher status. So people were thinking of showing, they wanted to display status, so they didn't, everybody picked from the top row. But that may be a byproduct of, right, simply the way in which we set up the game. When we actually put that same watch down, then they pick the other. So it's just a setup of the game, which of course has its limitations, right? Yeah. Yeah?
So, given that fashion is a reflection of culture, it's not stagnant, and it also will bring back different decades in the cycle, thematic, focuses. What about the populist movement across Europe, about our current presidency in the US, is connected? I mean, looking at fashion in isolation is one thing to understand consumer behavior in an isolated scenario, but what about the political and social trends that influence fashion with this concept of the working man, populism, because fashion comes from Europe first, then goes to the US. So what's happening has there been any corollary association with, for instance, newspaper articles on class or on anything like that with this increase of fashion that's trying to downstream lowbrow trends or upstream lowbrow trends? Is there any?
No, it's a very good point. So fashion is very cyclical, and taste, the diffusion of taste is very cyclical. So the idea is that now we do see this type of behavior, but it's a reaction because there is a lot of talk about the fact that the traditional status signals there's a fundamental crisis of those symbols. And so the high status people are engaging in all sorts of behavior that go beyond the model of I spend a lot of money, hence people think I'm wealthy. So on the one hand, we see the rise of what I was saying, like cultural capital and education being more of symbolic ways in which people recreate boundaries within society. That's more sophisticated, that go beyond just like economic capital, or this type of alternative ways. But the interesting thing is that if maybe we were to project this 15 years from now, then ripped jeans, which actually right now they already are are super mainstream. So the idea is that then the high will have to do something different, because then it's as if that same behavior has lost its signaling identity and it's not differentiating them enough. So you're right that it's all a cycle, and maybe it's possible that in 20 years people will be, in fact, saying how this type of behaviors that now look niche will be outdated. And of course there's also a lot of influence from like what's going on in the environment and the culture. And we do talk, I didn't have time to go through this, but in the paper we also talk about the change in aesthetics and in politics that may have influenced the fact that now people are broadening the scope of whatever they think they can use, and so using things that are seen as lowbrow is not a taboo anymore. Yeah, so definitely. Yeah.
So you talk a lot about when high goes low, and I guess like Coach and some of these traditionally, or Chanel and some of these traditionally high-end are offering high-end versions of lower products. But what have you seen from the other way around of like traditionally low end either industries or brands that are offering super premium, like Denny's offering like $1,000 Grand Slam breakfast,
yeah,
like their restaurant menu, or like Supreme, which is traditionally from a lower tier industry of skatewear and t-shirts, offering $1,000 t-shirts coming up. Do you see, the trends meeting in the middle, or is that fundamentally a different dynamic?
Yeah, so if I got it correctly, your question is a bit, if we were to put the trickle-down approach, right, that I showed at the beginning compared to the trickle-round, what is the relative proportion of the two? Do we still see a lot of more the traditional signals, the pricier the better, or do we see a lot of these type of signals?
Yeah.
Correct, yeah. So I do think that this is still pretty niche right now, but it may be that maybe this gains so much momentum that then that becomes the popular one. I don't think so though. I think it's meant to stay still like divergent brand that do this. On the one thing on Supreme, right, there was I think Supreme is a very interesting example because Louis Vuitton did a collaboration with them, and in fact they wanted to buy them, but I don't think they did in the end. And so I think that has to do, it's another facet of this phenomenon that has to do with subcultures. So if you look at it, I've been looking at things that are fundamentally seen as lowbrow or downscale, but oftentimes there are in fact some papers that talk about subcultures and the role of coolness, and how marginal fringes of society that have a specific cultural aspect to them can be the generators of new meaning and status signals. But so I think it's a little different, and there's definitely something.
So do you see Supreme as just being the Chanel of streetwear, and that within that niche market they are just simply a traditional high-end retailer or high-end brand?
So I think they've been a bit the victim of Vuitton that appropriated them following this style. So I think right now I see them as being co-opted.
Okay.
Right? Yeah.
Can you assess if the sort of low also trickles up to the middle? Like, is there any way that you sort of prove that doesn't happen? Or is it possible that instead of trickle around, it's just trickle up?
Yeah, so there are a few papers that in fact that have looked at subcultures, and in fact they talk about trickle up. But what we see is that in fact and this is more those papers that I mentioned before about the middle status anxiety, and it's pretty well established that the middle status people refrain from any association with the lows. So, and in a sense, when we find you've seen that we always find this curvilinear trend. So that speaks also to the fact that the middles are the ones who are the less likely to engage in this type of behaviors. Yeah.
So there's kind of a hidden signal, like in the high-end products that you listed. For example, the duct tape shoes that are actually $500. So there is a known signal there that it's a very expensive product, even though it's meant to look low status.
Yeah.
So who do you think can understand that signal? Do you think that middle status people can understand that it's a low status product that is actually in reality high status, like it costs $500, or is that more of a signaling to other high status people?
It's a very good point. First of all, the fact that they cost so much is very coherent with the mixing and matching, right? So I cost a lot, so on one dimension I hyperconform to the high end, on the other one I deviate by having the tape, right? So that's consistent with the mixing and matching of two things in one product. But the two papers I mentioned at the beginning, the one that say that people continue, say, using Chanel, but they just buy a Chanel bag that only a few people can see it's Chanel, they talk precisely about what you just mentioned, which is called horizontal signaling. Meaning that I don't care a lot about the fact that other people who are below me understand this, but the ones who are as me, the fact it's horizontal, they will get it, that this is a Chanel bag. So we don't look at this precisely here, but those papers would think that, yes, they are sending a signal to the other ones who get it, and if some other people don't, they're okay carrying that cost. Yeah. Somebody else? Yeah.
How do you define high, middle, low status? Is it also an income level, or is it just like what your knowledge of fashion is?
Yeah, no, in different ways. So we do both. So we look at it in different, either it could be knowledge, or we also look at more income. In fact, one study is income. Another one is your own rating of your own social status. So we try to get the same construct in different ways. High-end restaurants, in that case, was done by the average price of entry, and then we just took one standard deviation above the mean.
And
so different
what
ways.
Percentages of U.S. population or world population fall into each bucket? Did you get that?
So the thing is that you have to think that we're sampling from populations that may not be very well descriptive of that typically we do check for that, and the ones in which we measure social status is fairly homogeneously distributed. And the fashion knowledge too, we check that it's fairly homogeneously distributed. So, yeah.
I have a question regarding the restaurant menu case, because you mentioned that the cost of this choosing non-stale product, that they can afford the cost of this identification. But in the restaurant, everybody can read the menus and know the prices. There is no misidentification. So why does the signaling work in restaurants?
So it's somewhat going back to this idea that you're conforming on one dimension. So you have a very nice setting, the restaurant is very nice, the price is very high, but then on one dimension you're okay offering potato chips. A middle status chef would not do that. That's the idea. So the high status chef feels confident enough that even if you're going there, he has Michelin stars, you're going to be okay with him offering potato chips. But the idea is that a middle status chef who's not as secure in his standing as a chef is not going to risk that. So it's a cost, but it's symbolic. It's not like probably offering potato chips is cheaper than offering, other things. So it's a cost in symbolic terms, and the idea is that people who are not secure enough, who tend to be not the high status ones, are not going to engage in the behavior.
Great. I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.